Okay, welcome everyone today. We're having a Didnt webinar, Critical Lessons Learned While Adopting a DevOps Lifecycle for SecOps using Agile. Advance. This is brought to you by your DevOps Special Interest Group. I'm Ron Franklin. I'm a Solution Architect with the Greenlight Group. Also, the leaders for the SIG group are Francesco Colavita. He's a business consultant with Micro Focus. Saeed Hussain, Principal Architect for the Darcy Services. And Rafael Paez, Senior Manager of Automation Performance and Tools at Amtrak. Advance. As I mentioned, I'm Ron Franklin, Solution Architect with the Greenlight Group. I have approximately a little 30+ years in IT and with specialization in DevOps and ITOM. And today's speaker is going to be Matt Snyder. He's Senior Information Security Engineer for VMware. I'm sure most of you out there are familiar with VMware. It's critical to the success of our Micro Focus product. And Matt, if you have a minute, would you like to share a few things about yourself?
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Just, through my journey, in my IT career, just seeing so many different ways to do things really well, and probably equally ways of doing them really poorly. So I'm kind of happy to be able to share that experience and hopefully, provide some useful information for everybody listening out there to hopefully avoid some of those painful lessons that we've learned and really help kind of turn the direction of your department into back onto the path where you want it to be going.
That sounds very exciting, and I'm excited to see your presentation here today, and I know everyone else here out in the audience is as well.
Thank you.
Okay, just a few housekeeping things before we start the presentation. This is a live session that is being recorded, and recordings are available to all Vivid members. If you have a question, please type it in the questions pane that you'll have visible. Okay, next. You'll have a webinar control panel, so you can see just toggle the view window between full screen and window mode. And if you need to type a question, just type it where it says type your questions here, click send, and one of the moderators and the presenters will see those questions, and we'll try to answer those at the end of the session during the Q&A. So before we start, we have a poll question that we'd just like to get an interest to see where our audience is. So our question today, to start off the presentation, is: have you implemented security as part of a DevOps plan or DevSecOps? Just please select yes, no, researching, or future plan. Well, Matt, it looks like we've got a lot of interest here in this presentation today.
Okay, that's awesome. It's really exciting. That's what I was kind of hoping for. It's something I'm passionate about, and we've seen over the past few years just the power of it and what it's been able to help us do and transform how we do business and provide better security monitoring as a whole for our organization.
That's great. It looks like we've got the results here up on the screen. So it looks like 20% of the people have implemented security as part of their DevOps plan. Right now, 25% have said no, they have not. Currently, about 30% are researching is for as security as part of a DevOps plan, and 25% have planned it for in the future. So it looks like we're probably a little bit fairly equally distributed among all the answers there.
Okay, awesome. Cool.
So Matt, would you like to share with us your experiences and best practices?
Yeah, so we'll kind of jump on in and just a brief introduction to VMware, and I promise this will be the last that we really talk about the company as a whole. I'm not here to sell any of our wonderful products or services or really get into how they work or what they can do for you. This is more about our journey on how we use this process internally our security. If you're curious about it, it's an awesome place. I love it. It's we've got tremendous challenges we're having to face and come up with solutions with, and just overall, I can't say enough, great things about the company. So if you want to learn more about it, there's the VMware website. And with that said, we'll jump into really the meat and potatoes and why people are here. Challenges. So providing security monitoring for any organization, it doesn't matter if it's a large or small company, there's going to be challenges. And as I've seen through the years, it really didn't matter the size or the age of the organization. The challenges that we were faced with kind of end up being the same, and that was kind of a surprise to me. Coming to VMware, you expect the big Silicon Valley companies to not have the same kind of issues that regular retail places would have, or any other type of organization. It's security is security. It doesn't matter where you're at, you still have the same type of needs. And what I've kind of boiled it down to these three main points that I think everybody is facing. And it doesn't matter what your budget is, what your team size is. These are the common threads that I've heard in different presentations and different talks that I've seen throughout the year. And what I didn't want this presentation to be is a praise session on how well we're doing everything, and one of those kind of fairy tale stories of, hey, we adopted DevOps and then all of a sudden the magical spell lifted and we were doing IT better than anybody else, and the challenges went away, and it's this perfect Disney character world, because that's not reality. So the three challenges, and we'll get into them, was really getting ahead of the needs of the business. I think that's common everywhere, is how do we, as a security provider for our organization, stay ahead of what different business units are developing and the needs, and meet their specific needs, and balancing that on everything that's happening in the world and all these new advanced threats that are coming out, and each one seems to be more destructive or harmful as the previous one. And moving to this reactive stance that's kind of been the standard go-to in previous years of we'll deploy these security tools, and when we get an alarm, we'll do this kind of stuff. And now we see that model didn't really work, because like most organizations, you'll go out, you'll buy a large set of tools, you'll spend a ton of money, and at the end of the day, companies are still getting breached. So I think we're starting to see, as an industry, that model of just reacting to alerts isn't very effective, and it's certainly not going to catch your higher end adversaries that are using really advanced malware. That's just not going to work for you. So we want to do proactive security monitoring, and that's really become a buzzword in this massive marketing machine that as people working in the security industry, you see everything's proactive now, or next generation, or some sort of fancy term. And outside of security, our colleagues are being bombarded with these little bit of snippets of this tool does proactive security this or that, and this tool does proactive this or that, and all these things, but we're not really understanding the story on how it actually does that proactive monitoring and actions, and that there's a ton of work that has to be done to make that work. And then really one of the key things that everybody's trying to solve is how do we create a manageable workload for the members on our team? That's a surefire way to burn people out, create a really poor outlook on morale, is if you've more work that is being done and we don't have enough people to do that. And it's not always a simple solution of being able to go out and hire more people or bring in contractors or use a tool to carry it down. So as we kind of get into it, getting ahead of the business needs, what does that really mean? it means making sure that we've got the foresight to start planning ahead of what we anticipate the business is going to need. That could be anything from knowing that the business has a major project coming down the pipeline and our resources aligned to support that project. If you're going to a new market that you've got, the training path, start in advance so you get into the market. Your teams.
Matt, I was going to say you're in good company. I think even Bill Gates had that happen on a live presentation.
Yeah, so is making sure that we're able to anticipate the needs of our colleagues so we can support them and be ahead of that. You don't want to be the team that's always kind of lagging behind and, whenever a big initiative comes down the pipe that, oh, well, it's held up with security, because security needs to sign off on this or be able to do this. And, it falls to our plate and we're, busy with 100 other things and we're not able to give the attention that they need to these initiatives. So really, we want to be able to solve that and get ahead of that so we can be proactive. So when, our partners come to us and say, hey, we're ready for this, it's not oh, well, we're too busy or we can't do that. Hey, we're good to go. Let's knock this out. And when we talk about moving from being reactive to proactive, like I said, I think the way that we've done things in the past just doesn't work. We buy a bunch of tools, we deploy them out, and then we rely on them to stop breaches and notify us when bad things happen. But the inherent problem with that is those are reactive. So you're getting notified whenever something happens, and it's all too often they don't stop the threats, they just let you know that something bad happened. So we need to get out of that model and start being proactive, because we also want to be able to show the business that we can meet their needs, in real time. It's the same as we see with like desktop support groups. Is you want to be able to reach that user before their computer crashes. You want to be able to solve, like in this case, a network issue before the network issue happens. And so I think as a security group, we do that for then, our other colleagues in the business where they're focused on providing a service. And I think historically, we haven't looked at the security department as someone that provides a service to the business. So, we'll get into it later on in this presentation, but that's what we want to do. We want to get away from this. We'll just create a million alerts. And, we want to stop this, kind of insanity of buying all of these tools and expecting them to solve problems that are really inherently just problems with the business and how we're doing things, and applying a real rational approach to this and breaking that down into manageable deliverables. And creating a more manageable workload. One of the biggest problems that we see today is just there's so much work being piled on, whether you're responding to incidents or trying to do investigations or trying to do some sort of vulnerability assessment on a new product or a new tool or a new service that the business is offering or wanting to bring in, or just answering just these array of questions. We have to be able to do it in a way that doesn't burn our people out. If you look at the security industry now, the job market is really tight. It's hard to bring in good people. And when you do find good people, you want to make sure that you treat them, fairly and appropriately, and that they have a proper work-life balance. And, they're able to go home at night. They're able to go to their kids' t-ball games. They're able to take vacations and, lastly, be able to eat dinner or breakfast or whatever without having to worry about, the business burning down and all these, crazy fires, or just not wanting to come into work because there's so much work to do and there's just not enough time to do it. And, I think you'll see in the IT industry, we have highly motivated people. They come into this industry because they want to be able to build and create and do things. And when you're overburdened with too many projects, you see over time, you look back that don't really accomplish everything you needed to do because you were running around applying break fixes to this or that. and you haven't really moved forward with that. So jumping into what we tried and it didn't work and why it didn't work. So as I said in the beginning, I don't want this to be some, victory lap for us where we come out and we tell people that, hey, we applied this and everything was just magical and we're so awesome. I've seen, far too many talks where people just go out and they highlight, hey, this is what worked. And, they leave out those critical parts of their journey that were real struggles. And then when people go to try to implement that same type of, program in their organization, it stumbles and they fail and they think, oh, well, it worked for so-and-so, why doesn't it work for us? So getting into that, just trying to set goals. So we knew that, each year we would have set goals for the department and then individuals. And then you kind of look at those goals and you think, okay, over the next year, that's 12 months. That's a ton of time to be able to get this stuff done. And then we would get, we'd start that in January. And then in December, we're like, man, it was just January. How did 12 months go by? And we look at our goals and, we're way off mark from where we started because we've continued to have to catch up with different business projects or adjust for, on the fly emergencies. And after we did this a few times, we realized that, hey, this model just isn't going to work. It's not enough to just set these organizational goals and then these personal goals and be able to expect everybody to just march to them, because it's not taking into account all this other stuff that's happening in the organization. Then, with that, we're like, okay, well, we just have to manage our time better. So we'll say each week we're going to dedicate a small amount of time to these projects that support these goals, and that will have to work. Because if I say I'm going to give 20 hours a week to work on this stuff, that should be doable. But then we get into it and we realize that, hey, well, I can set aside this 20 hours, but I have 10 other people coming to me every week and asking me for time to do this or time to do that. And, by the end of the week, that time that was set aside is no longer there. And then it's been given to other people because of higher priorities. And then with that, we came up with the idea, okay, well, to make that work, we'll just tell people no, that we can't take on the things. We're overutilized, we don't have time, we don't have the resources, so we'll just stop taking on new work, and that will ensure, no doubt, that 20 hours that we were going to set aside doesn't get taken. And that went over like a lead balloon. It didn't even get off the ground. Like that just, you can't do that. You can't tell your business partners no. It began this cycle of a project manager or a colleague would come to me and say, hey, Matt, we need you to do this or that. And I would say, hey, I can't do that right now. My plate's full. I've got all this other stuff going on. And, you would get the soft pushback, but this is a major project. So many things depend on this. This is reporting up to insert your big name, vice president or director or somebody on, the C-suite, and that, they're not going to be happy if we don't do this. And then at that point, it starts to turn into a conflict of, who's going to give. We said we're not going to give because we need to get all this other stuff done. The business isn't going to give because they're trying to get this stuff that supports, business initiatives to get pushed through, and it becomes a security is blocking the progress of this, and that doesn't look good for anybody. And when it's all said and done, we found most of the time we were having to give in to those requests, even though we had initially started with a no, we can't do this. It really created a sour process for everybody, on both sides of that fence. For me, it's like, man, well, if I say no, my no doesn't mean anything, so I really don't have the power to say no. Why are we even telling these people no? Because they're just going to keep escalating it until it comes back down. And then at that point, you've got, your senior leadership involved in there, and they're wondering, well, why isn't security doing stuff? What is their deal? Why is Matt always telling people no? And that just didn't work. It didn't create a good relationship, and in the end, it creates more conflicts than it resolves. So this is, how we decided, we really needed to develop, to buy into this DevOps lifecycle. And for us, and, one of the things that I think is so beautiful about this is it's a framework, and it can mean different things to so many different people. It doesn't have to be just, well, the book says DevOps is this, and this. That's not what DevOps is, and that's what it's not about. It's about taking this sort of simple process and you thinking about what you're going to do, and then the coding is doing it. You deliver this product, you run with it, you see how it works and how it doesn't. You learn from it, and then you repeat that process. And in the end, it's a culture. At the heart of this, you see, it's about establishing this culture of, think about what you're going to do, figure out how you're going to do it, deliver that, let it run, and then you manage it. And managing it is collecting feedback. Customer feedback is critical through this whole process. And your customer is internal, it's external. It's everybody that touches this is a customer in this. And you need to get their feedback, because you can't do the second iteration if you don't know how the first iteration worked. So that's what, we started looking at from a security lifecycle. Hey, that's what we kind of have to do, because the threats are always changing and evolving. We don't have a stationary set of threats that we can just go out and do this one program, and all of a sudden it's said and done and the problem's solved. So that's, I think, one of the biggest benefits, and we've seen how this is successful in the actual more traditional development phase type organizations. I mean, if you look at a product and, thinking outside of VMware, take the iPhone and look at the first generation iPhone and the most current generation iPhone. There's probably no doubt that as they were engineering this and designing it, they wanted the first generation to look exactly, have the same capabilities as the most current one, but you're limited to what you can do at the time, and you're limited to your resources and the available technology. So we build this minimal viable product that's going to get us to market and provide a really good product, and then keep adding to it and growing and developing. You don't just build one thing and then stop. And I'll take us into, so you have DevOps as more of a culture, and inside of that, we find that most people will develop, pick one of these like improvement methods. And for us, we chose Agile. And, you could probably have 100 conversations with 100 different people and get, 100 different takes on which one's the best and why you should use it. We went with Agile, and I think what it basically comes down to, all of these aren't really that fundamentally different. It's about finding a process that's going to work for your organization, because everybody has these subtle differences that won't apply across the board. Agile seemed to work the best for us, and this is a infomercial on Agile. It's really just what we decided to go with, but they're all just about making a plan, getting organized, and executing that plan. And that's what I would, encourage everybody to focus on doing, is finding what works for you, and not trying to take, hey, somebody gave a presentation on this and that sounds pretty cool, so we're going to do it. And then, you might find that, hey, this doesn't work, and then you just give up on the process altogether. So Agile in sprints. This is the method we're using. We found that it's worked well for us. It might not work well for you. And really what that means for us is we want to be able to, as it says, be agile. We want to be able to roll with the business needs. We need to be able to pivot to emerging threats that, are high priority targets for us, and be able to execute on that quickly without having to completely redesign everything that we're doing or have to scrap our yearly goals and do that. And we found that breaking them into these 2-week sprints has worked, because it keeps the finish line always, upfront and visible. If we set these two long-term goals, you know, the finish line gets cloudy and it's easy to get distracted and you get off target. And after you've gone a few months and you kind of reassess where you're at on that map, you've found that you've drifted off course considerably. Having these small sprints has really enabled us to focus and get out our product and our service and our offerings as quickly as we can. And the Agile methodology really kind of follows closely with the DevOps lifecycle, as you can see here. And really what this is about is, you know, the development phase is just really creating the process, identifying what the work you wanted to, prioritizing that, and making sure that aligns with the business needs, and that's going to give you the most bang for your buck. Putting it out there, reviewing it, getting feedback, approving it, and then getting approval. And approval really is getting buy-in from, you know, whoever you're working with that this is working. And if you're not getting that, then you know you need to make changes. There's a ton of great information out there on these processes, and I didn't want to get too focused on the fundamentals because this is an Agile course and it's not a DevOps course. It's more of, you know, what we've done and kind of taking away the highlights from those. And really what really worked about Agile for us is we really started defining what our workload is. And that's a scary thing because it's going to require you to be vulnerable. You have to give an honest assessment of what you're doing and what that workload looks like. You know, it is tough from a security standpoint to be able to say, hey, we have too much to do or we can't do all of this. But if we can't do that, then we're not really being honest with the business and we're not being honest with ourselves. Because you can't expect us to, if we have a limit of we can do X amount of things per day and we're exceeding that, that's not sustainable. It's no different than, you know, the configurations of a server. If you put X amount of memory in there and you put X amount size on your hard drive, you can't exceed that. That's a hard limit. If you do, you're going to crater that server. So we needed to define that so we could let the business know what we were doing. Once we defined that, then we started to look at where the immediate needs were. Where did we need to stop, you know, whatever you want to call it, stop the bleeding, stop the fires. You need to focus on what's causing the most damage or what's causing, you know, the most friction within your organization and start to figure out how we're going to fix that. And what we found key to doing that is you have to think small. It's really easy to go from the security perspective of, you know, there's a billion threats out there and there's all kinds of things that can go wrong and they're dangerous. And we end up taking this little molehill and we turn it into a mountain. And climbing that mountain ends up becoming too difficult. It takes too long and we never reach the end state. So what we started to do is focus on small improvements where we could be successful quickly. That meant in these 2-week sprints, we needed to be at the end of that, have deliverables that were provided that were successful. So we could get buy-in from the people internally and externally. And that's where I think people have the hardest time implementing something new is I think we're inherently against change and new things. And, you know, that can be kind of scary. And success and failure are contagious. So what we saw when we were succeeding, we would grow and we would make a lot of progress quickly. Where we would struggling, that would snowball too. And all of a sudden these little failures turned into major failures where we missed, you know, key deliverables or major milestones. And it kind of went back of, this is where your organization is going to buy into this process that it's working or it's not. So being able to show wins quickly, it is key. And lastly, you know, still very importantly, and this is hard to do, is you have to go and you have to collect feedback on the improvements that you made. And it can be tough because it can be a major hit to your ego to have spent, you know, a good amount of time on developing a solution to a problem and you implement it and you want to give yourself, you know, a huge high five because you solved this problem. and you go get feedback from, one of your customers in this, and they're like, yeah, that didn't have a noticeable difference in my life at all. And it actually ends up being kind of stupid, and we don't like what you did at all. And to be able to take that back and not be like, well, no, you're just wrong, is tough. So you have to listen to that feedback and say, okay, that's great feedback. Show me where this didn't work for you. So when your next cycle, you take that feedback from them and you fix that. And then what that does is it gives you a true win because you fix their problem. And then it lets your customer know that you're listening to their feedback and you're actively solving their problems. That gives them buy-in to, hey, you said that you're going to do Agile and the DevOps mindset, and that it actually works, and you're not just taking some trend word, slapping it onto what we've been doing all along, and somehow it's different. They see this, they buy into it, and then they want more because they see that, hey, this impacted my life. Now I don't have to do that step, 1,000 times a day. You fixed it for me. Hey, can you look at this? And then we start to grow and build off that success. And defining our workload and getting ahead of the needs of the business, really from our sprint planning perspective, what that allowed us to do is tell not only our immediate leadership, but our external partner leaderships, hey, this is what we're doing. So it no longer became this, mystery of what security is doing. We could provide them with an actual roadmap to say, hey, over the next few weeks, these are the projects that we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. These are the people that we have involved in it. This is how we've broken down the workload. It's going to take X amount of hours to implement this new process, and these are the people that are doing it, and here is a deliverable date. It was amazing how we started to do this. The shift in, the dynamics with these teams, became, because they started to see it, where you were to take, one issue of, Ron comes to me and says, hey, Matt, I've got this thing. I need you to do it. If I tell Ron no, that's not going to sit well with Ron. He's going to be like, no, this project is important. I need it done. You need to do it. And I'm going to go up and, I'm going to escalate this all the way to the top until I get somebody who matters to tell you to do this. Take that same situation, and then now we have apply it with these sprint plans. Ron comes to me and says, hey, Matt, I need you to do this. I can say, okay, great, Ron. Let me look at my sprint plan. This week, I'm tied up. I've got all these other deliverables to do, but in the next sprint, I can probably work this in there. Let's talk about what, success is going to look for you. What all do I need to do? And Ron and I have a quick chat, and I say, okay, that sounds like it's going to take me about 3 hours to do that. I can do that because I have time in this next sprint. Ron walks away happy because I didn't tell him no. I didn't blow off his project. And now he doesn't have to spend the rest of his day trying to find people to escalate this problem. He gets to go back to his boss and say, hey, Matt's got this. This is when they're going to do it. This is how long they think it's going to take. And this is what the output's going to look like. It was amazing once we started to do that, how we could still tell people no, but we weren't having to tell them no. We were just saying, hey, you know what? We got this. It's scheduled. Here's your ticket number. This is when it's going to get done. And they walked away happy. Even though it wasn't going to be something that we were going to do right away, they still felt like their needs were heard. We were taking care of them. And then we were doing it in a way that allowed everybody else visibility that this was actually going to get done, and not Matt just saying, yeah, Ron, I'll do that. And then as soon as he walks away, I kind of like laugh and joke with like, yeah, right after I finish these, million other things, I'll put you at the top of the list. And then he comes back and says, well, hey, you said you were going to do that. And I was like, oh, well, that was just sarcastic. So what we started to do within those 2 week sprint cycles, we said we were going to max out the hours of planned work to 50 hours. So that gave us 25 hours a week of work that we were planning. And as great as it would sound, is that doesn't mean as soon as I hit 25 hours, I got to clock out and go home and get paid for the rest of the week. It didn't work like that. We had to leave time for the unplanned work, the projects that just came up, or the things that we really hadn't been able to pinpoint that we needed to do, but we just know based off of what's happened in the past that we were going to need to be able to do these things. And then having the pre and post sprint plan review meetings. because that's where this feedback loop is critical. We needed to be able to identify what worked and what didn't work. That's where we kind of focused in on being able to say, okay, a 2-week sprint cycle works for us, or maybe for your organization, it needs to be a 3-week sprint cycle, or 2 weeks is too long and you want it to be a 1-week sprint cycle. That's where we honed down. 50 hours was a really good average of loading up this work, because it didn't kill us and it gave us time to be able to work with colleagues on their high priority, quick turnaround issues. And it gave you the ability to, if your kid was sick and you needed to go to the doctor's office, you could do that. It gave you the ability to take a day off, leave early, do all this other stuff to make sure that you were taking care of yourself, the way that you needed to take care of yourself so you can be the most effective at work. And then big picture planning, we still kept with we needed to have a high level, these are the things we want to accomplish this year. Taking that, breaking that down into quarterly objectives and saying, okay, this is how we're going to try to get it done. And then that breaks it down even further when you get into your sprint planning, because in this quarter, you need to take on these tasks and then you need to get them done. Getting ahead of the business, and what we started to do with that is, it was critical for us to know going into these planning cycles what our business goals were, and not just, what VMware's goals are, as an organization, the kind of high level things that you hear about in, the quarterly earnings calls. It's like internally, what are we trying to accomplish? Are we trying to drive, work anywhere, do anything type of activities from like IT business wise, or is the business trying to lock down this type of activity? It didn't make sense for us to do things on our own that we decided we needed to do security wise. The idea of locking down the network and applying multi-factor authentication every 15 seconds to have like the most secure state possibility doesn't work when your business wants to encourage people to have more of this mobile workforce. Where we have people out in the sales field where they're traveling all over the world doing stuff. We needed to make sure that they could get to what they needed to get to and do things appropriately. We needed to make sure that if I go from my office to, our Palo Alto's headquarters, I could do that without having to be this major task of now I go there and my stuff's not going to work. From a security standpoint, it'd be easy to say you work in the Dallas office, you can only connect to the Dallas network and you can't do anything else. So if you want to go to Palo Alto, you have to open up a ticket and we'll do all this other stuff. That just wasn't going to work. So you have to kind of check what you want to do security-wise and make sure that that supports what the business does, and you're building your solutions around what the business is trying to accomplish, because that then gives you a partner, because I can go to our network team and say, hey, I know y'all are trying to do this. We're also trying to do network security stuff. Let's team up and make sure that, what we're doing matches up with each other, and we gain a friend in that endeavor, and that should help make our lives easier, because we're gaining that, network resource that knows the network ins and outs better than we could ever possibly know, and knows the limitations of the devices, and it can help us with that. So, we switched from being kind of that adversary and telling them, hey, you need to do this to your network, to we became a partner and we have a common goal. So if you're not doing that, these programs, I don't think are going to be that successful for you, because you're creating friction where you're not going to win those battles. And then the last thing that's really allowed us to do is we started to sync up our planning cycle with the business cycle. So we knew what their big initiatives were. We knew when they were starting these processes. And so we started to shift when we were going to be able to support them. So when, business unit A comes to us and say, hey, we're launching this next greatest thing, we can say, hey, yep, we're ready to go. We've got this resource dedicated out to you. You've got them for this many hours a week. This is what they've kind of already done to prep work on that stuff. And you start going from, the people that nobody wants to work with because you're constantly telling them no and you're busy and you can't do this, to this proactive unit that's ready to support the business. And you no longer become that roadblocker. You're no longer that impediment to success. You start to become critical to their success, and they start leaning on you, and that engagement grows over time. Moving into this proactive security, this is an area I'm really passionate about because we see so many, articles and postings about these next generation type things and how this next tool is going to solve all of security's problems because it applies, machine learning or artificial intelligence or some other made up marketing word to your organization. And that stuff, not to knock it at all, but if you don't have your basics in order first, it's going to be garbage in, garbage out. There's no other way to look at it. We're doing automation stuff now, and this isn't some tool that you go out, you buy, you plug it in, and you get to say, hey, we have automation. I read an article recently where AWS was talking about how, their SOC or this monitoring area was 100% automated, and the reason they did it because they couldn't scale to this, and so many people start to see this stuff and they say, hey, I want this. Amazon automated all their security monitoring for this type of stuff. We should do that too. But the article doesn't talk about the years of work and development and planning that went in place to be able to support this. You can't, and business executives, they forge you and they're like, hey, you guys should be doing this. And you're like, yeah, we should be doing that. That's an awesome idea. Everybody should be doing that. And you also want to just kind of hand them back the article of like, hey, if you invested $1,000 in Amazon, 15 years ago, that would be worth, $100 million or whatever that would translate to. But that's not how it works. I can't just go to, a stockbroker, give them the article and $1,000 and say, hey, I want this return and I want it right now. That's not how it works. It took years of uncertainty to get to that point. Security is no different. You really need to get in touch with the alerts that you're getting and really digging into them and tearing apart. Are they working the way that they want to? And, it's easy to take repeatable tasks and you become numb to them and just that's the way it's done. So we're just going to keep doing it that way until, the end of time. So you have to be honest with what alerts are working, what's not, and then start developing a plan to put small changes in place to do this. Don't look at it as we're just going to completely redo the way we do security monitoring and that's going to change it. Start with small things, and when I say small, things that you can get done in a day. It's these 1-2 hour little tasks where you're fixing this or that, and each week you're building upon that. That's what's really going to drive change and improvement because the people are going to be able to start seeing this. And have a plan. Solve the problems, and you have to stay focused. It's really easy to get distracted and try to focus on, the news story of the week because this company got breached with this stuff. Stay focused on your core things, and you're going to get to that stuff in due time. And then defining your workload is also key things. You need to be able to go to the business and say, this is what we're doing, and here's the data to back that up. And it has to be data, and it can't be that, hey, I went and talked to this team and they said they're really busy. Well, everybody's really busy. You can't go to people making financial decisions and expect them to approve something based off of emotion or not having any data to back it up. So understanding where all your work's coming from. And that's just not security tools. Are you responding to instant messages all the time, from your colleagues? Are you responding to emails all the time, phone calls? Anything and everything that you're doing, you need to break that out and figure out where you're spending the most amount of time so you can get that back to the business. And so, sort of a formula that we used, and, you could probably spend all day and pick this apart, but at the core of this, it gives us something we can take to the business now. And it's simplistic, yes, but it works. And it gives you something, it gives you a starting point. So for our monitoring tools, how many alerts are they combined generating? And you divide that by the number of analysts working. And then you multiply that by the average time it takes you to work that alert. And then you divide that by 24 hours because that's how much time in a day we all have. There's no getting around that. Every company has 24 hours a day that they're dealing with, and you can only do so much work based on, this set of criteria, and that's our SOC utilization. And that's what we use to be able to go back to leadership to say, this is where we're at. Based on our current, input, this is the output we could give you back. And you can't do more than that. You have to follow certain steps for an alert. And yeah, you can have people work, more hours a day, and you can do all these kind of things to help push things along, but you haven't really solved that problem. This also allows you to see that, hey, this area is generating more work than we kind of initially expected to. So we need to put some time there, because if we focus on that, we're going to see the biggest payout. And then we can go to business and say, hey, based on everything we've tried to do, we tried to bring this number down, but the only way we can really move this, this number into a more positive direction is by adding more people or bringing in professional services to fix this tool, or purchasing that tool that, they had been hesitant about because they just didn't have the budget for. Because once you know how much work you can do, then you can really start to set legitimate, service level agreements and key performance indicators, your SLAs and your KPIs. I've seen a lot of times where people just throw arbitrary numbers at this and say, hey, a critical alert, you should be able to respond to that in 15 minutes. That sounds good, but then when you look at what's actually happening, you see that, hey, there's no way we can respond to this in 15 hours, much less 15 minutes. And you get into this, to throw, metaphor at it, do you want to get McDonald's quality food, or do you want to get the finest restaurant quality food? There is a massive time difference between when you place your order at both of those places to when you receive it. McDonald's, you're going to get it super quick, but it's not going to be the best food as if you go to the nicest restaurant in your town, and it might take them an hour to get your meal. The quality is so much different. And that's what we really need to keep a focus on is, as an organization, we need to make sure our quality is there, and not that we're checking, the box that we met the SLAs. Because if your workload is, at 400% and you're meeting your SLAs, I will guarantee you that the output of that work is garbage, because there's no way you can beat, these made up SLAs and do this amount of work at the same time. There has to be give and take, and this gives the business, data to make decisions on what direction do you want to go in. And so, really, kind of tying this up as we kind of get to the end of this session is what didn't work. Some key takeaways I want everybody to leave with is following, a textbook methodology, whether it's using Agile and Sprint or anything else out there, following it to like the letter of the framework or method is probably not going to work for you. And sticking to that is kind of foolish. You need to be able to take that as a framework, identify what works, remove what doesn't, and make changes to make sure you're being productive. Because you don't want to go too far into, we'll do everything the way Agile says it does, but you're spending more time trying to fit in that process than you're actually outputting good work. So keep that in mind. Find what works for you and make continuous improvements on that. It could be mixing together things, and it could be looking at all of those things and saying, hey, you know what, it doesn't work, but we got this method. It's going to give us the same type of output, and we're going to continue to improve and get better. That's what's important. And it's going to be tough. People are not always adapt to change. Security, we probably lead the pack in the want to resist to change. I mean, it's probably like a video that you see on the internet of somebody trying to put a leash and a collar on a cat and take it for a walk. It just doesn't end well, and there's clawing and screaming, and at the end, both people are traumatized and never want to do it again. So keep that in mind and start small. find quick wins, and move on from there, and keep at it and keep going. Because if we don't continue to improve, there's no way we can offer the level of security monitoring that our organizations, need to have and deserve to have. And career-wise, we're never going to be happy because we're stuck in these same ruts. In sprint planning, that's tough. Taking people, like engineers or in the SOC and telling them that, hey, you're going to plan out your work. You're going to put them in these like Jira cards or some other documentation. And then we're going to have these sessions on planning it and sessions on what worked and what didn't work and all this kind of stuff. It's just, it's a tough sell to do and expect them to just take it and run with it and just be happy. You have to, have this slow transition period where you're getting buy-in. Because I know when I first heard about all this, I was resistant to it. I thought it was the dumbest thing in the world, and it was a hard sell on me. But once I started to see how this was benefiting, not only my career, my job satisfaction, because I didn't feel this pressure to have to answer, what are you doing and why didn't this get done? Because this methodology spoke to it and people understood. So just keep that in mind. It's not going to be easy, and if you think it's easy and everything's going smoothly, then you really need to check on that your team's engaged and they're not just kind of pencil whipping this along, because you should expect, some resistance and some tough patches, but you will get through it and you learn from those, and you need to make sure that you're taking feedback from your team that's implementing this and making the changes that they see, and not being so rigid to, these textbook methodologies, but you're listening to your people on the ground and making adjustments to continue to get their buy-in. Because if you say, no, well, that's great feedback, but the Agile handbook says you have to do it this way, I'm not going to take your advice on this, you're going to lose people in that process. What your people are saying is more important than what the methodology is saying. And that's going to have a bigger impact on the product you output versus, hey, we followed this process to a step, and you look at, the output of that, and it's just a complete disaster. So with that in mind, that's really the high level stuff that, I really felt didn't work and was really passionate about. And just real quick, I know what's next for us is this isn't going to end. We're going to keep going with it. Every time we reach the end of a sprint, we start a new one, and we keep going. The goal with this is to never be finished, always finding more ways to improve, because the reality of it is you're never going to be finished, and you should never be finished. And if you ever do feel like you're finished, bring somebody in to review what you've done, because you've done something wrong if you ever think that you've reached the end goal to this. All right, with that, I already kind of went over these lessons learned. The Phoenix Project is a really good book to read if you're looking at getting into this or just reading the cliff notes on the internet. And all these slides will be available. And so I'll kind of kick it over to you, Ron, to help wrap this up.
Okay, we have a couple questions here before we go into the upcoming Didnt events. So what type of metrics do you use to measure your progress?
Yeah, metrics right now, our key goal is our stock utilization. So we need to see what they're at. So if you go back into the slides and you see the formula that we use, that's what's showing us is what we're doing working or not, because everything that we do should be to reduce that utilization level. So, kind of keep that in mind is we're deploying new security products and we're deploying new methods to this. We still need to make sure that that number goes down. So anything that we do, we need to make sure that we're not adding more work to a team that's already overutilized, because if you do, your output of that is just not going to be successful. It's not going to work.
And how long should a person expect to implement a DevSecOps process?
It's really an open-ended process. The way that I would, suggest you look at it is break it into, you've got 4 quarters in a year. The first one is really just to kind of get the wheels moving on this and finding what works and what doesn't work. I don't recommend jumping into the deep end right away on this and just expecting it to be successful. Start small, get buy-in, and then build off that in each one of these phases. That way it's a subtle improvement over time and not some jarring change from the way things had always been.
And if you were to start your process today, is there anything you would do differently?
With that, I would say no. I think that's the key thing about the DevOps lifecycle is it's not trying to not ever make a mistake. It's enabling yourself to make mistakes, but in a way that you can identify it really quickly, make the change to it, correct it, and then go through it again. So I wouldn't change anything because the failures are what's going to help drive buy-in. Because when you fail at something and then as a team you come together and find a solution, not only did you fix a problem, you also improved, that working relationship with the team because you fixed something and you made it better, and you start to see and enable the team to know that, hey, it's okay to make a mistake, certainly within, a margin of error. You can't go out and just make, wild, inappropriate errors and not, exercise, good judgment, but you're going to fail. And that's hard as a security organization where, if you fail, that means breaches and bad things happen. You have to give yourself that power and that freedom to make a mistake, but know that your process will help identify that mistake quickly and you can fix it and move forward.
And one last question here. What type of return on investment have you seen as a result of implementing this process?
The biggest thing that I've been able to see with this process is the relationship we've been able to have with our leadership. And when we go and ask them for new tools or for additional headcount, by putting in this process, they can see exactly where we're making improvements. And it's not going to be, one of those cases where, everybody's seen it in their career. You go out, you buy this software, and it ends up just sitting on the shelf because nobody deploys it. They can see the process improvements we're making along the way, and they can also see how we're reducing that utilization number. And it's not going to be this thing where we come and ask them for money, and then we have to ask them for more money to make that thing that we first asked them for money for to work. So it becomes this bottomless money pit where we just keep asking them for things. We show them how we saved money by reducing utilization. So when we reduce that, that's additional headcount that they don't necessarily have to go buy because we fixed it, because we fixed the process. So they see that we're looking at this holistically and making improvements across the board.
Hey, Matt, well, just want to thank you today for this excellent presentation. I know you've given us a lot of things to think about, and not only for those who have implemented a process, but for those who are planning to implement. And I appreciate you just sharing yours and VMware's experiences in implementing DevSecOps today. And just once again, from Vivid, I just want to thank you for sharing your information.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I'm happy to be here. And just again, sorry about the technical difficulties earlier on.
And for the audience out here, here's a slide with our upcoming Vivid events. Hope that you can be at one or more of these events, and we appreciate you showing up today. And if you can advance the slide. Just as we mentioned earlier, just the Vivid Roadshow will be coming up in May and June. And if you're able to attend those, we would love to have you come there to be a part of the Roadshow. Just as a reminder, each Roadshow event will have a 1/2 day ITOM presentation, lunch and networking, along with a 1/2 day ADM presentation. We'll have one micro focus, one partner, and one customer presentation for both ITOM and ADM. Lunch is sponsored, and we're looking forward. Like I said, Roadshow events will be in Atlanta, Cleveland, Dublin, Washington, D.C., Troy, Michigan, Richmond, Virginia, Chicago, Illinois, North Carolina, St. Louis and Kansas City, Missouri, and Wisconsin. And once again, we'd love to see you come and be part of our roadshow. And we thank you for showing up today. Advance the slide. And so just as this, please take the short survey at the end of this so that we can better serve you. So once again, from your Vivid staff, we thank you for coming today to this presentation. Thank you.